And quite frankly, she is someone who we have all come to know very well through her work, which has been featured on Netflix. Bridgerton season 3 premieres on May 16th for part 1 and part 2 on June 13th. Julia Quinn, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here and for putting out this content. And I know what's interesting to a lot of us is that this series of books, Bridgerton, did not get written in the pandemic. It was not released during the pandemic. We're going back over 20 years now that this content has been out in the world. Talk to us about what it has been like to go from being an author who is obviously well respected and highly regarded in your field to now being someone whose literary work is on the screen and in houses all across the country.
It's honestly, it's surreal. I mean, eh, you're right. When you say the books were written quite some time ago, I figured out based on the publication date of the first book that I would have written it in 1998. Um, but it's so funny because in some ways it didn't seem that long ago to me because it's always been my most popular series. So was still always hearing from readers about it, but to have it suddenly have this new life is just crazy. It just feels so amazing how big it's gotten, just how many people are involved because when you write a book, it's just you. And now it's this project with thousands of people. It's I keep coming back to the word surreal, but there's really not a better word for it.
Now, one of the things that struck a lot of people was this notion that this was such a diverse cast. Now, for folks who have not read the book, does the diversity that we see on the screen, is it also reflected in the pages of the book as well? The
It
books,
is
plural, I should say.
it is not. I mean, I don't specify anybody's skin color, but it's implied that they're white. Um, and that's the way the genre of books were at the time. Um, that's we know now after having done a bit more research, and I'm ashamed to say it's something I didn't know then, that England at that time was a lot more diverse than I gave it credit for.
Mm.
Although in truth, the upper class, which I'm writing about, was not as diverse as it is on the show. But I like the idea that we're making a show that is giving us a slightly better world and a world where, everybody can see themselves in the happy ending. And so I love it. I think it's really wonderful.
You know, I've often wondered about that, like how it feels to be an author, to put out this work that's then picked up by folks in Hollywood. You know, Shonda Rhimes, love her. But then it's sort of put on the screen in a way that is true to the substance, if not necessarily true to the presentation that was in the book itself. And I'm wondering how was that presented to you? Hey, we love Bridgerton. We want to put this on Netflix. We're going to have a major budget. Shonda Rhimes is involved. Yay, yay, yay. It's amazing. And then you see this script and you're like, well, wait a minute, this is different, not necessarily good, bad, or otherwise. It's just different. What was that moment like for you? How did you become aware of the notion that they were going to have a much more diverse approach to this story than perhaps the one you had taken in the writing of it?
I always knew that they were going to do something to make it more diverse. I mean, this is Shonda Rhimes. She's not going to make a show that's all white, and she shouldn't. Um, and what's really fascinating is that I just sort of assumed it was going to go one of two ways. I thought either it was going to be truly colorblind casting, which is not what they did. What they did is something called color conscious casting, and I'll get back to that later.
Oh,
But
wow.
colorblind casting would have been like if you had the Bridgerton family and there were, four different races there, and so when we look at the show now, the Bridgertons look genetically related. So
Okay.
it's not colorblind. Or I thought they were going to change up the story to relate it somehow more in the issues of racism and colonialism and some of the, trauma and, truly terrible things that were going on and incorporate that into the story in a way that was like, quite historically accurate. And instead, they went a third route, which I confess didn't even occur to me, which is probably why they make television and I don't, um, which was to create this kind of slightly alternate universe. And I love that they started with a real historical, I'd say mystery, which was Queen Charlotte of mixed race? And this is something
Right.
that historians have debated for some time.
Now,
And
do you deal with that debate at all in the writing of the book, or is that something that was introduced to you through the presentation on Netflix?
through Netflix, Queen Charlotte actually is not in the books. Um,
Wow. She
I
plays such a
know.
such a dominating character, and she's a phenomenal actor. I mean, wow. Okay, so this was
So
all sort of here's Shonda's take on this world.
yeah, well, she's hands down my favorite change. I go back and forth between wishing I'd put her in and being really glad I didn't, because I don't think I would have done it as well. Because it's just
Wow.
she's such a brilliant addition, both in the way that she creates this really great framework for the story, and then also Golda's performance. Just, I mean, I'm in awe of her. It's
Outstanding.
she,
Outstanding. Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I think she doesn't get enough credit. There are moments when she just does this thing with her mouth, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she's brilliant. I don't know why she hasn't received all the Emmys, but um,
I have
anyway,
some suspicions. I have some
okay.
suspicions as to why she has not. But yeah, her facial intonations, the way she's able to command a room with a look, a glance, it's amazing how she's able to do that. So this really has been, in some ways, taking your story, reimagining it through the eyes of a Shonda Rhimes type figure, and then putting it on the screen. Have you received any pushback to that at all? Because we saw with Hunger Games and with other stories that sort of
Mhm.
took the books and then put them on the screen, and then and actually in Hunger Games the characters were described as people with brown skin in some ways. Particularly, I'm thinking about the character of Rue in particular. But was
Mhm.
there any pushback from your fan base when they saw what was on the screen looking and feeling a bit different than what you had put on the page?
There was a little pushback when they announced the cast, because I think people were just kind of surprised. And also when you just see the cast, you don't know how it is that they're going to make it happen. You don't know the story. You don't see, if you just see the cast, you don't know immediately how well it's going to be done. The
Mm,
way that this writer's room has arranged it. But in truth, there wasn't, most people were kind of open to it, but there were some people who were, I call them historical accuracy police, and they were really upset. And then most of that disappeared after everybody saw it, and just saw how fabulous it was, and what, a gorgeous kind of fantasy it is.
yeah.
Nobody's looking at this and thinking it's a history lesson. Instead, what we're seeing is this beautiful romantic fantasy, with no dragons or anything like that, but, a little bit of a fairy tale quality where everybody gets to see themselves in the story. And it's something that I am understanding more and more of as I get older. I like to say one of the things about privilege are all the things you don't have to think about, right?
Indeed.
And so one
Indeed.
of the things that I realized I never really had to think about was, you know, the fact that I could see myself in the story, even though I'm not, I have no British blood at all. If I watched a Jane Austen adaptation, there were still people who basically looked like me. I could still kind of imagine myself very well. And I don't think I truly understood. And I mean, I'll never 100% understand, but I don't think I really got it until I started hearing from people with Bridgerton saying how much it meant to them to see, especially when we had season 2, and now the female lead was South
Mm,
Asian, and not just South Asian, but a fairly dark-skinned South Asian. She's South
right.
Indian. And
Right.
I would hear from so many of my Indian American friends saying how much it meant to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's when I really started to understand the power of it. And I'm honestly grateful and honored that somebody took my work and managed to transform it into something that could bring that joy to that many more people.
Mm. There is a scene in the second season where, and I can't believe I'm blanking on her name, Mama Bridgerton, the mama of
Violet.
Violet. Yes. So Violet is her husband has just died, and it was terrible, tragic. It was awful. The oldest son is now assumed to be the man of the house, and
Mhm.
Mama Bridgerton, Violet, she's pregnant. She's about to deliver, have a baby, and there's this scene where there's a question about which person in which entity in this room is going to come out alive. There's a debate about, because she's in the throes of labor, she's trying to get this baby out. The doctor's like, this ain't gonna happen. I can either save the baby or I can save you. But he doesn't pose the question to her. He
Mhm.
poses it to her oldest son. And and even though this is something that happened, it's a fiction. We understand that it happened, generations and generations ago, to the extent that it did happen, and it's built on sort of some sort of historical reality. That scene felt so 2023 at the time, 2024 now, because
Mm.
we realized just what life was like for people who have a uterus, who don't have the authority of a husband, or and have to look to their oldest male child to make these sorts of decisions. Talk to us about that scene, what it represented to you, what you think it meant to those characters in that moment, and the historical yet present connection that it was able to make. Something that screams from centuries ago, connecting with what women in this country are facing right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. And one that is making my skin crawl. Not your fault. That's the fault of the Supreme
I
Court.
was gonna say I didn't write it; it was on the screen.
No, 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 not that. I mean, no, what's making my skin crawl is what's happening in our society today.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I mean, I can't believe I marched in 1989 and now here we are. Um, just so one thing in the book, that's not how it goes down. In the book, she has, I think, a fairly uncomplicated birth, but that moment was, I mean, as a viewer, that really got me too. And that is basically what would have happened. I mean, women really did not have the agency to make decisions about their own bodies in that way. And um, oh gosh, I mean, people can't see me because it's radio, but now I'm clutching myself because that's what's happening today in so many of our states. And it's just horrifying. And I guess, being a somewhat political animal, I'm hoping maybe somebody will come away from that thinking like, that's just whack. I mean, her
Mhm.
son, he's what, like 19, 20 at the time? Why does he get to
Right.
decide? And that's basically what's happening in states like Idaho right now, which actually, just had that EMTALA thing in front of the Supreme Court, which is,
Right.
it's like, what were they arguing? Like how many like organs it's okay for women to lose before they actually intervene and give her medical
How
care. So
close to
yeah,
death? Yeah.
I mean,
How
we
close
could
to death
go
can
off on
you
this.
get? Yeah, seriously.
I'm sorry. I think it's safe to say I'm with you on your politics on this one. Um, but yeah, I mean, I like the way that we're putting, like the way I hate that there's any resonance. There shouldn't be any resonance in women's
Right.
rights from the early 1800s to now. But, if by putting it out there in that manner kind of shows the absurdity of what so many of our conservative politicians are trying to do to us, then I think that's great.
Yeah, yeah. So what can we expect from this third season? I know folks have been very excited about this. I was a part of the crew. I was like, what you mean we don't know if there's a second season? What? Like what is going on? And I will be honest with you. I binged this in like a weekend during the pandemic. And it was when
Mhm.
I realized, okay, we really are, this is a real thing. And Netflix and binge I hadn't binged a whole lot prior to that. I learned my binging skills definitely got their strength during the pandemic. But what can we expect to see from season three? Are we going to have a whole new cast of characters? Are we sort of doing the tangentially related to the previous season thing that happened between season two and season one? What can fans of the show expect to get with this? And then there's two openings. There's a part one and a part two. Why are you doing this to us, the fans?
Okay, I
And
have
what can we go
nothing
from
to
there?
do with the part one and part two. I don't,
We're
that's
gonna
a
blame
Netflix,
Shonda for this.
no,
Shonda, you
or
want to be
Netflix. I don't know. I mean, that's a marketing thing. But I can tell you the thing about the whole tangential thing, that's how romance novels work. When you have a series of romance novels, you can't keep talking about the same two characters over and over again, because if you bring them, the whole thing of romance novels is that they have a happy ending. And if suddenly like book two was also about Daphne and Simon, then I'd have to give them something that basically took away their happy ending, right? It would be, I'm sorry, Shonda, but it would be like Grey's Anatomy where we keep killing people off. So,
Which
uh,
seems to be a working methodology for her. She's the one person who can kill off anybody, and her fans will still stay connected.
well, it's true. And that's actually why when people found out she was adapting Bridgerton, she's like, oh my God, she's going to kill everybody. And I said, no, no, Shonda understands what a romance novel is. But what it means is that the next book in the series is about somebody who was a secondary character in the first one. So that's what we have again. So we have our favorite core characters, but this time two different characters rise to the front, and that's Colin and Penelope. And it's a whole new type of love story because they are, unlike the first two, where they basically just kind of met, you saw them meet. Colin and Penelope have known each other forever.
Right,
So,
right.
there's a different type of intimacy between the viewer and the story because we already know them. And then there's
Mm.
also a different love story arc because they know each other, they think they know each other, and they realize there's a lot more to the person than they ever thought. So it's a friends to lovers story. We had enemies to lovers for season 2, and now we have friends to lovers.
I'm a fan of Penelope. I'm rooting for her.
Yeah.
I'm rooting
I
for
think
her.
everybody roots for Penelope. I get more
Yeah.
fan mail from people saying they relate to her than any of my other characters.
I could see it. I could see it. She's amazing. I love, and the woman who plays her, I mean, all the cast, they do a phenomenal job. But her character in particular, I've been rooting for her for a little while, so I'm glad she gets some love and she's
Yeah,
getting to
Nicola's
shine.
fabulous. And if you haven't seen her in Dairy Girls,
Oh, I have not.
oh my gosh. And it's, you know what? They're
Okay.
half-hour episodes, so they're short, so it's even more bingeable. But you may need to put on the subtitles because takes place in Northern Ireland and they've got some accents.
Okay, I will put that on the list, Dairy Girls. I had not heard of it. I will check it out. I'm excited about season 3, Bridgerton, which premieres on Netflix in 2 parts. Part 1 on May 16th and part 2 on June 13th. I will be one of the folks in line for both of them. We've got also 2 new editions of Romancing Mr. Bridgerton that are also available from Avon Books. We've got Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. The trade paperback is available today, and the mass market will be available on May 21 of 2024. Let's get these dates out properly. I really appreciate your work being on the screen in this way. I'm so glad that this collaboration between your work and Shonda and Netflix, it's given us a lot to discuss, lots of great content, and I'm a fan. So I will definitely be binging as much as I possibly can
Thank
come the
you.
first
Thank
release in
you.
part 1 and part 2. Thank you so much for being with us today, Julia Quinn. Really appreciate you spending some time with us this morning.